part of the a genesis for us wanting to do this project or do this research study was, really on our own end, really trying to figure out what the value proposition is, right? Because we hear coaches talk all the time about, well, we want to play fast, and to play fast, you got to practice fast. But a lot of times what those things are what's being said isn't necessarily being translated into actual practice, because they are limited by the means that are available, right? The traditional methodology of a lot of this stuff is one, two, or three coaches, maybe even four coaches, holding pieces of paper and binders and running out to different various positions, right? Someone on this side to handle the split wides, someone in the middle to handle the skill behind them, and then someone to step forward with the offensive line, right? Well, that's a lot of manpower to convey a very simplistic message. And what they're trying to convey really has very little to do with a coaching point, as it is more about just getting guys organized, right? It's just about getting them set up and giving them at least some information relevant to what they want them to do on the next play, right? Which is just their route or their blocking assignment, or what pattern they might have, or what have you. And so what we started looking at that, we said, okay, if everybody gets, between 2 and 2.5 hours of practice every single day, give or take, but everybody inside of that practice time is doing the same things. There is no secrets in football, right? Everything's on tape, everything's on film. Everybody's doing right around the same types of things. And so what we did was we really wanted to look at the anatomy of 1 minute. That was it. We figured out if we could just look at 1 minute and analyze 1 minute of practice from snap to snap, what did 1 minute really truly look like in a practice not during your individual periods, but during your team periods, your periods where guys are getting together and going against each other, where you're trying to snap the ball to get an individual rep, not individual instruction. And what we ended up doing is we used a study that was put together by Matt Rhea, who's the strength and conditioning coach at Alabama, head strength and conditioning coach. And then we actually also sat down and we requested film from tons of our different high schools. Right now we have over 400 high schools and small colleges and FBS programs using us around the country right now. And so we requested a bunch of film, and we wanted it to be non-cut. So we wanted just the raw footage. And we got about 100 hours of film. And now we didn't go through all 100 hours, but what we did was, two of our sales reps, Joe Furco and Drew Robinson, both are coaches or in administration at the FBS level, and have spent a lot of time in football coaching at all different levels. And so what we did is us three sat down and we dove right into the practice film. We started looking at, okay, from snap to snap, let's start recording and looking at what are all the different activities that are occurring. What were your experiences? And then we reached out to coaches and asked them, like, okay, what are you guys doing during this between snaps? Like, what is really the ultimate goal? And a majority of the time, what we heard was, we're just trying to get to the next rep. And, as a business owner, as somebody who manufactures something, right, a physical hardware component, we're never just trying to get to the next device, right? We're trying to build a process that streamlines the manufacturing of many devices simultaneously, right? And so as we started to look at what the process was between snaps, from snap to snap, we started wondering, what similarities are there in a manufacturing process to a play calling process on the field during practice, right? There's got to be overlay, because you're requiring people to produce something every second of that period. And what we actually saw is a handful of things. Number one is that what we realized is that in that time frame, roughly 91% of all scout team periods. Now, this is not just scout team. This is special teams periods. This is 7-on-7 type periods. This is anything where a play is being called. And obviously there's fluctuations, right? Some teams are doing some things differently, but on average, this is just on average, that an average play from start to finish took about 5.6 seconds, and that very little activity occurred for the remaining 54.4. And we started looking at that and saying, okay, coaches spend tremendous amounts of time preparing for practice, spend tremendous amounts of time preparing for the upcoming games. Now, the game of football is naturally, right, start and stop, right? There's something like 11 minutes of total action in a 60-minute NFL game, right? So, I mean, there's, this is baked into that process. But what we really started to pay attention to was what was really occurring during that 54.4. And what we realized is that the average team across the board, at high school, small college, the NFL, or FBS, even at the NFL level, we're getting somewhere between 1 and 1.2 snaps per minute on average. All right. So effectively in a 10-minute period, they were getting somewhere between 10 and 12 snaps on average. Some got more, some got less, but on average. But what we really figured out is that in that, basically that 10-minute period, 8 minutes and 53 seconds was spent just trying to relay information to players. But that information was more about organizing than it was actual player development, enhanced coaching, increasing, the pace at which we were going, the teams were going. And what we saw was that it was also because so much of this was inefficient that you actually also saw slow substitutions. You saw guys not stepping into the play. And so that was slowing the entire process down. So in a 10-minute period, we saw about 1:07 of actual activity, right? Which actually breaks down pretty closely to that 11 minutes and 60 minutes analysis. So when we looked at this, we said, if I'm a football coach, right, whether I'm, Gus Malzahn at Auburn, or I'm Mike Kessler at Leward High School in Rochester, Minnesota, that 8:53 has got to be the most important part of my day. How do I maximize that 8:53? Because what coaches fail to realize is that, yes, your schemes can be great. You can be an X and O's wizard. But if the players aren't executing what you're putting on paper, it really doesn't get you far. That 8:53 in a 10-minute period, that 8 minutes, 53 seconds, is where the greatest competitive advantage from week to week can be had by individual teams. If they can figure out ways to simplify communication, if they can figure out ways to reassess or reassign coaching responsibilities, right? Instead of having 4 coaches worry about holding a piece of paper, they can actually now focus specifically on player development and maximizing that 12 to 15 seconds they have between what they're doing and when we're trying to get ready to snap the next play. I can actually give guys real insight and coaching to help them get better. Because the other component of this is that, especially on the scout team side, right, transitioning from transition time to scripted time, that change also adds a lot more development and depth to the program. If you can spend less time worrying about organization and more time helping those players who are your freshmen and sophomores who are going to be part of your 2 deep in the next year or two, become better football players and build their football IQ during those time periods, then you're inherently building depth in your program and allowing your players meaningful football snaps week in and week out. And so as we started to look at this, we started to realize that what our technology provided coaches is effectively maximizing that additional 8:53. Because with GOROUT, when you send in a play, it only takes about 500 milliseconds from send to receive from the coach to the player, right? So that's a half second worth of time. The human brain can't even pick up audible transmissions in a half second. That's how fast it works, right? But when it requires one coach to send this play in, now all of a sudden those other coaches who are holding binders are solely focused on, this is the play we're running. Now here's the technique you need to pay attention to. So now they're constantly coaching, not organizing. But in addition to that, they're maximizing communication because all 11 players or 15 players or 22 players, depending on how many devices you have all received that play diagram with a coaching note for their individual position if the coach wanted to provide one. But it allows the seamless transfer of information rapidly and effectively. And then the player has a reference point now. Instead of coming back to the card and listening to a coach talk about 11 positions, he just now has to pay attention to his job. So as he lines up onto the line of scrimmage, he has a very clear and concise idea of what he's supposed to do so he can execute it. Well, if all 11 guys on the field are much more dialed into what they're supposed to do, inherently the rep improves. But so too does the pace of play. And when teams are using GOROUT, that transition time drastically reduces and the play sending time drastically increases. So using us, teams are now able to average, without changing anything, right? That same pace that they were going 1.2 snaps on in a minute, they're now able to go 2.6 without changing a thing. If they wanted to go faster, they certainly could. But very, very little has to go into them going and doubling, if not tripling, their rep output when they use our technology. And, you know, we hear it all the time from coaches that when our technology is being utilized, they're saying a lot less in turn. The practices are a little quieter because now the practices are focused solely on development, not necessarily on yelling, just telling players where to go, come in, come out type of situation. It's just everything, that part of it is managed for you now by one coach using his cell phone and sliding his finger back and forth. So we've removed a lot of the barriers to entry in terms of communication and really started to pay attention to, if everybody got 10 minutes in a period, if I could get 2.6 snaps versus my opponent who maybe is only getting one, and of that one snap, of those 10 reps, maybe they're repeating 2 or 3 of them because the looks weren't good. So really they're only getting 7 out of that 10 minutes. They're actually going backwards in preparation time. They're getting less out of that time than a team who's using our technology, who is now looking forward and saying, well, we're not exactly happy with the way that rep looked, so just rerun it again. But now it's still within that 2.6 second window or the 2.6 snap window. So instead of maybe getting 26 snaps, now they got 24 snaps that are new, right? And they had to redo 2 of them. But they're able to basically drastically change the output. And so that means that their team is going to be twice or 3 times prepared in terms of preparation and in terms of what they saw week to week or what they saw in practice each day in terms of scheme or planning, than the team who had to actually go backwards and start losing time because the process was so slow. And what we really pulled out of all of that more than anything was that the teams that used us, that used our technology, at the end of the study, coaches said that they saw that the football IQ, the applicability of understanding what they were supposed to do throughout the course of the year improved drastically between when they first started using it to the end of the year, where now a coach would send something in and players knew where they were supposed to go and how they're supposed to line up and what they were supposed to do. And based on that information, what we started to provide coaches was more insight about how their players were actually starting to learn. And what we learned from all of this is that really traditionally about 70% of student athletes that are football players respond as the primary or secondary learning styles are kinesthetic or multimodal. Well, our device speaks to both of those learning capacities. So now you're providing them a tool on the field that speaks to how they're learning. And you're providing them information that's critical in an expedient manner, which allows them, 1, to clean up what they're supposed to do, 2, consume more information faster, and 3, execute more specifically. And if they can do those 3 things and they can do it 2.6 times in that same 1 minute period. Now, not only are you developing football players at a higher level, at a faster level, but you're getting more out of your 10-minute practice window. And so that practice maximization component of that, we looked at and said, this is very similar to that, to the manufacturing process that we look at constantly of how do we streamline, how do we make multiple devices at the same time, how do we make multiple boards, how do we manufacture multiple components simultaneously to minimize the amount of uptime that the machines have to run. Well, those same principles are being applied here now with our technology on the field, except instead of doing it with lithium-ion batteries and processing chips and boards, now we're doing it with information and players and execution and preparation.